Hey everyone, and welcome. You're not used to seeing me sitting in my office chair when we're going live, but here I am. Today's session is a little bit unusual. I'm going to be playing a video of quilting actually and doing a commentary throughout. Same way that you can ask questions though, and we'll talk about it as it's happening. It's just my talking will be separate from my quilting, if that makes sense. So the project at hand today is the Hexie quilt that I was working on 2 Fridays ago. If you give me half a sec, I'll show you a picture of it. Here it is. This is it unquilted. So this is the project that I was working on. And a couple of Fridays ago, I did the first session and I basted the whole thing and I quilted the central white and yellow flower part. And then today we'll be doing a lot of the surrounding and color work. So that's a tiny summation of what we're doing today. I'm just going to take a minute to greet some of you coming in. Because we aren't live streaming with the multiple cameras that we usually do, we don't have to go through that process of checks and balances as we often do. But let me just scroll through a couple of comments anyways, just to say good morning to you all, because this is so fun. Laura Gray and Marion, Betsy, Shelley, Carrie, Karen, Debbie, Sharon, yeah, looking forward to seeing how I finish this quilt. This is so unusual for me because I'm actually going to show you photos at the end of the quilt, fully finished, bound and everything, which you don't usually get to see as part of the program. So that will be very fun. And I love Fridays. Thanks, Mr. Producer and Susan. And Mr. Producer is here in the room because he's my fail-safe, but today I'm running the show. Can you imagine? A couple of Sharons, Angela, Chris, Grant, Tony, Step by Step Quilting. Oh, I love your name. I assume Step is your last name. Victoria in England. Awesome. Texas, Dakota, lots of places represented here today. Okay, a few things before we get going. You are welcome to ask questions or make comments today as the quilting goes on. What I've done is I recorded the whole finishing of the quilt, and it took about 4 hours. And so I condensed that, and I kind of guessed at how much quilting time to leave in to give us time to have conversation and talk about what I'm doing. And of course, I left in the portions that had points that I wanted to make or things that I wanted to show you in this process. But a lot of it was just sheer repetitive, very repetitive quilting, and that will be one of the things that we talk about as we go through. However, feel free to type in your questions and comments. If you can, remember, put a QQ in front of them, and that way I'm able to search for them and find them among the general conversation and chatter that's going on. You're welcome to talk with each other throughout this too, obviously, in the chat window. So just looking to see if there are any further questions. Jackie is commenting, hi, love the summit. For those of you who are watching live and not as a replay, there's been a free motion quilting summit going on. Today is the third and final day. And I will be fairly quick with my presentation this morning so that those of you who are in the all access pass can still get to the final Q&A session, which is in a couple of hours. Okay, have we got everything in place? I think so. So I think we're going to go ahead and start the video of the quilting. Once again, let me just give you a brief overview of what we're doing. This is the Hexie quilt. This was hand-pieced by a lady named, and I hope I say it right, I think it's Gady. She's a Honduran lady, and she works with an organization called One Common Thread, which you can absolutely Google, onecommonthread.org. And these Honduran ladies both piece entire quilt tops, as this one was. It came to me as a completed top, or they make kits of hexies that you can complete. So that's something that they do to earn money for their families, for their children, to purchase stoves, to help build homes for themselves, all these things. So I encourage you to check out that website and see what that's all about. But that's how this quilt top came to me. It was from Gady. And I tell you what, this lady has an artistic talent. Working close up with the quilt, I got to see firsthand her color choices and how she combined things and just the design idea of this quilt. I've never seen another one like it. It is so stunning. It caught my eye, obviously, and I'm so happy to have finished it now. So I think that said, we're going to just dive right into the video. Again, type in any questions and comments you have, and I'll kind of do a running commentary as we go. Here we go. Let me know, by the way, how the sound levels are for you, if I've got the music at a decent level with my voice and with the sound of the quilting. So here you're seeing the last little bit of what I quilted in the earlier episode. I was working on the white and yellow central areas, and I quilted these almost buttons in the middle. And I've not done this on a hexie quilt before, so this was a bit experimental for me to see what this will look like as a finished result. And I literally went round and round 4 or 5 times around each of those circles in the yellow portions. And I wanted to create a frame for the flowers in the cream colored part. And you'll get to see photos of all of that at the end. So my original plan was to then quilt all these different floral areas, the pinks, the greens that represent leaves, the purples, etc., and change colors to match the flowers. And so this first one, I picked a light or multicolored one that I quilted first. And I'm just going point to point on all the arcs of these little hexies. So this is why I basted the whole quilt. Again, refer to that earlier episode if you want to see that process. I started at the top, basted the perimeter of it, and a line across in front of my front rail. Rolled the quilt up a little bit, basted the sides, and another line from side to side. And I proceeded all the way down the quilt like that because my idea was, well, then I'll come back and I'll quilt all the pink areas with pink thread, and I can roll back and forth and catch all the pink flowers. And then I can do all the purple flowers, and then all the green ones that represent leaves, the green hexies. That was my thought. Doing this first flower, right away I realized, A, how long all these arcs are going to take. I figured out one day how many of them there are. There are thousands, and I now can't remember the number. But I saw how long that was going to take, and I realized how complex it was going to get if I started to quilt areas and then had to come back and join up and not over quilt the areas, but travel on these hexies. So here's the big pivot that I promised you guys. Before I was done this single first flower, I had already decided all the hexies are getting quilted with one color of thread. That's just it. So you're seeing me finish off the first flower here, and we're going to be moving to the top of the quilt. And I'm just reading comments as we go, so bear with me if I sometimes hesitate in my voice. I'm seeing a few of you chime in, like Nita. I bought one from the website Purple Grandmother's Garden. I'm hand sewing the hexies. Yep, so awesome. Getting lots of good mornings. One of the Dianes is saying, love the circles in the hexies. Me too. So you're seeing me rewinding the quilt, and we put the little picture in picture through a lot of this video so that you can, I wanted you to be able to see the close-up, but also to get an idea of what it is I'm doing, like there when I was rewinding the quilt. And again, that's the advantage of basting the entire quilt. As we go on, you'll see that there are some disadvantages too, so I don't honestly do it very often. But the big advantage is you can roll the quilt back and forth, and things don't shift out of place. So what I've got loaded right now, I'm stitching on a Bernina Q24, and I've got a pale yellow thread, almost a rich cream thread loaded, and it's a 100% polyester. Isacord is the brand that I am using in a 40 weight, and I've got the same thread top and bottom. Now what I'm fixing to do here is change the presser foot out, because I'm thinking to myself, if I'm going to be doing all these hexies corner to corner, point to point, my cup foot that you're seeing right now is quite large. It's over an inch from side to side, and it's kind of translucent, so it really impedes, honestly, visibility. And it's a trade-off between the way that it scoots over these bulky seam allowances and the way that it's hard to see. And I guess I did not change the foot there. So see, I'm going on memory here of what I was doing. Yeah, I think I did pause. Yep, here we go. Popping that spoon foot off, and I'm going to put my darning foot on, which is the number 9 darning foot on the Bernina machine, because it's so tiny and has such great visibility, and it's much, much easier than for quilting point to point on these little arcs. So I'm in the upper left-hand corner, as you can see in that picture. My perimeter is basted, and I opted to baste very near the edge of those shorter hexies, and I'm going to trim off the ones that extend out further. There's been a little bit of discussion in the comments since I posted that first video over whether or not I should have done that. You know, each of you is welcome to your own opinion, but I knew that I would not have the time to try to make binding that goes around all these points. So I opted to square it off. And that funny flashy look is when I clipped bits out of the video. So you'll probably see that a few times. I tried to pick a smooth transition. I don't know that I was really successful. I'm not a professional video editor, you guys. But here we go. As I said, simply quilting point to point. And I wonder if I can turn up the movie sound a little bit because I don't think you can hear the machine. Are you able to hear the machine? Somebody chime in if you can actually hear the machine, if you wouldn't mind. One of the things that I changed in one of those first pauses when I edited it out was that I started with my stitch regulator on, and I quickly realized I found this a ton easier with the stitch regulator off. So the whole rest of the quilt now, I'm going to quilt in constant speed. And I think I had about 600 or 700 set on mine, which would be 600 or 700 stitches per minute, or per minute. Yeah, per minute. I had to stop and think there for a sec. And that is entirely personal. I adjusted it a little bit to try and find a speed at which I didn't feel rushed, but which I also didn't get a million teeny tiny stitches filling the spaces. So I did fiddle with that a bit, moving it up and down until I had a speed that felt comfortable and I didn't feel tense stitching it. But as you can see, super repetitive. So right away, I realized, yep, I made the right decision in just doing this row by row. Like I said, it took me, our first episode, I think, was about 2 hours together, and it took me very nearly a further 4 to stitch all this arc, all these point-to-point arcs. So already that was about a 6-hour quilting job. You know, there were a few breaks in there to roll my neck and shake my arms out and get a drink of water, but by and large. And so had I changed threads for every area, I think we would have seen that time close to double. And I was not prepared to put that into this quilt. I knew I had to get on to other things. So that was my choice. And Kim is asking, what was the finished size and how long did it end up taking you to quilt? I've just answered the how long. The finished size was about 83 by 86. It was almost square. So a fair-sized quilt. It was big. I'm so sorry, I can't remember. I did at one point figure out how many hexies there were and therefore how many arcs. And of course, I did not remember to bring that number with me to this live. Jan is asking, does Isacord offer pre-wound bobbins in the color you are using? Do you know they don't, Jan, that I'm aware of? I don't even know that Isacord has pre-wound bobbins. I do use the Wonderfill pre-wound bobbins a lot. They're Deco Bob, particularly. Maybe that's the only pre-wounds they have, but they're an 80 weight thread, and so they have a lot of yardage on each one, and it does come in a cream color, but I just continued with what I had started with on this quilt. Again, remember, initially I was considering changing thread colors, right? So I'm kind of eating my words here, you guys, and I am working on memory, and maybe I should have taken better notes. But it seems to me, if you watch that first episode, I talked about using a light and a darker Deco Bob. So I actually do think I have a Deco Bob on here. Certainly there is an eggshell one, and I'm thinking that is what I actually have loaded. So I'm eating my words just a little bit. Victoria is saying then the machine is really quiet. Let's see if I can turn that up a touch. Let me know now. I've turned it up a little bit. If you're able to hear the machine, you guys, just let me know in the chat. I can hear it in my headphones, so I think hopefully that will help. Nancy's asking, how many breaks did you take? That's a long time quilting point to point. It absolutely is, Nancy. And first off, I didn't even do it all in one session. I did it in several. I would go and quilt for 45 minutes and then take a several minute break. And at one point I stopped overnight and finished it the next day. I have frequently quilted for several hours in a day or even in a session, but seldom with this repetitive motion. I found this definitely very, very tiring to just sit and make arc, 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 arc. My neck got very tight. So I took frequent breaks to roll my neck, shake my arms out, get a drink. Okay, I'm dropping the music a little bit. I think I've got the machine at the top. I made it low in my movie, so I think that's all we've got machine-wise. Nita is saying Magna Glide and Deco Bob pre-wound bobbins are great. I agree. I do love the Deco Bob. Because it is 80 weight, you get quite a bit more yardage on a bobbin, which is really nice. Fewer changes, for sure. Let's see what else we've got. Victoria, yay, it's louder. Good deal. Jennifer, yes, now I can. I assume that's Hear the Machine. Good. Sharon, this quilt is so pretty. I'd love to make one. Let me throw that up a sec. Here we go. However, I don't think I have that much patience. Thanks for your patience. Okay, so here's the thing, Sharon. I know for a fact I don't have the patience or dedication to stitch a whole Hexie quilt. So again, seeing this one when Courtney of One Common Threads first posted the photo from Honduras and said, hey, does anybody want this quilt? Should I bring it home? I stuck my hand up right away because I thought, I'm never going to piece one like that, but I could sure have fun quilting one like that. So that's what I did. Okay, Mr. Producer is listening in too, and he keeps telling me less music. So you guys give me feedback. Trying to keep these things sort of leveled is tricky, and we don't really have experience doing this. Let's see. Nita is saying, hear music but no machine sounds. I'm on YouTube. That was a few minutes ago though, so let's see how it's going now. Okay, Mr. Producer is going to drive my machine for a second and try to make some adjustments here for you. Dorothy's asking if pre-wound Deco Bob bobbins come in the bobbin size for most long arms. I know that they come in the M class bobbins, Dorothy, because that's what I use. I'm actually not sure if they come in other sizes. I would just hop on Wonderfil's website and have a look for that. Nancy, the texture is beautiful. It is. You know, there are not that many choices, I feel like, for a Hexie quilt like this. I did not want to do an all over because the colors, the arrangement of the fabrics is so spectacular. I wanted to do it justice. So what I mean by I didn't want to do an all over is I didn't want to quilt like something else floral, for example, over top of this, because I thought that would be distracting to the eye. So I felt like these simple point-to-point arcs were the best of both worlds. I did something a little different in the central area of the quilt because it is distinctly different and became a focal point. But then to just lay in these arcs over the whole rest of the quilt kind of acts like an all over in that it's the same texture and quilting design over the whole thing. Does take a little more time because you're pausing at all those points. You just are. But I was really happy with the results, and I can't wait to show you guys the pictures at the end. Victoria's sound levels are perfect. Jennifer, sound levels are good in my opinion. Good. If you guys are happy with it, that's great. I'm going to scroll back through some more comments because I know a bunch came through earlier that I didn't even see. So, Kim, I saw that. Diane, loved the circles in the hexies. Me too. I was so happy with that when it was all said and done. Well, here's another person who is, let's see here. Donna, hello from beautiful North Carolina, working on hand stitching hexies right now. Look at you, staying in the theme. And then we're back to good mornings. So feel free, fire off any questions that you have, and I'll just keep talking otherwise. A few of the things that I learned as I quilted too was I did find just a wee bit of shifting, partly because there are so many layers on the back of this quilt. The basting, it was not machine basted, it was hand basted with stitches, but the folds of fabric were quite big. If that makes sense, those of you who have done paper piecing, I think will know what I mean. So that underneath each of these hexies, there's quite a bit of folds of fabric. So that makes things shift a little bit, right? So I messed around with the order in which I quilted these. So you can see above where I'm stitching now, there's a row of arcs missing, but going under like I am right there and under like I am right here, help to kind of scoop up that fullness. And it's very small, but clearly I'm doing it very, very frequently and in every row. And then when I work my way back, I'll do the top side of those arcs, and that kind of manages a bit of that fullness. It's a theme that you probably hear from me frequently, which is when it comes to getting a square and flat result, It really does rely on your management step by step throughout the whole process. So if I just went on pushing the hexies down with each row, I would end up with a problem. And you'll see later in the quilting, there were times when I had to manage it more aggressively because I was getting a rill of fabric pushing up against the basting lines that I really had to manage. So these are the little things, though, that I do try and think about as I'm quilting. Is there any way I could manage it as I go? And doing these underneath swoops right here and here, and then doing the overtop swoops later was part of the way that I managed it. Okay, let's look at some more questions. Charlotte Sue, if you had known in the beginning that you were going to quilt it row by row, would you still have basted the whole quilt like you did? And the answer, Charlotte, is no. I'm glad that you asked that question, because this is something I've learned throughout my years quilting and throughout many quilts is, for me anyways, I don't always know what I'm going to do at the outset. And for the purposes of this quilt, I planned what I was going to do, something in that floral area in the center, the white and yellow, and then something else in all the different colors. So with that plan in mind, I did all the basting. I changed plans, but the basting was already in place and the center was already quilted. So I just worked with that. But had I planned it this way from the start, I would have literally begun at the top of the quilt and quilted it row by row by row till I got all the way down to that central portion. And then I would have done several rows of basting to make that whole center area be stable. And it wasn't very tall. It was 2 or maybe 3 passes on the long arm. Do you follow? And then after I had all that done, then I would have gone back below it to row by row by row by row without the basting in place, because it would have been a little easier. This is one of the cons of pre-basting the whole quilt. Just inevitably, when you roll it up into a roll, that quilt top stretches just a tiny, tiny touch, and you're always working then with a little bit of fullness against that basting. But what I've learned is just trust the basting. Trust that I basted it carefully and it's in place, and do work with it. Okay, let's put up a few more comments. Victoria, finishing my work day and taking you to my studio, a glorified she shed where I'll be crafting and watching you. So awesome. Victoria, if you didn't see earlier, is in England, so a very different time zone from mine, or is in the UK anyways. Yeah. So again, feel free to ask any more questions. Feel free to give me any comments, frankly. Here's one from Nita. I just want to say Courtney is wonderful. I'm really enjoying the hand sewing a little each evening. 1,800 hexies. I'll be done by summer 2025. So I gather that you bought a kit, Nita, which is so awesome. So awesome. And I will say too, in the interest of being totally honest, remember that Honduras is a third world country, and the fabrics that these ladies are working with are mostly gifted or contributed, often from people in the US. But what I found in this quilt was I definitely had a certain amount of like mixed fibers in it and a little bit of irregularities, right? But I was thrilled to just see what Gady created with perhaps limited resources. You know, you think of terms of she doesn't have a rotary cutter. I guarantee you she did not purchase pre-cut paper hexies, right? She's working from scratch, totally by hand. So I took it for what it was, a hand-pieced quilt, and it's beautiful. Did some stitches show? You bet. Was there some easing here and there? Also, yes. Did I care? Also, no. It's a beautiful, beautiful quilt, and I was so thrilled with it. Okay, any more thoughts and comments? Like I said earlier, I was so much guessing how long to leave this video run. And how much chatting to do with you all and how many questions you'd have. So I think as a whole, it runs about 50 minutes, but you can see I've skipped ahead now. There's a point coming up where I believe I have a bobbin thread break, and I'm going to show you that. Debbie Fleming, I just got here. Hubby was taken back to surgery. I have an hour and a half, and I'm glad to catch some of this. Well, Debbie, we're happy to amuse you while you wait and perhaps, take some tension out of your shoulders. Okay, what just happened there is that I ran out of bobbin thread. This is the Susan way, just quilt till the bobbin runs out. And then I'm rewinding just a little bit because those last few inches of bobbin thread then did not have proper tension, right? Because they're not through the bobbin spring as they should be regularly. So I always undo a few inches and I drop my blue seam ripper where I stopped so I can find my place again. And we're going to change out the bobbin. So just a few notes while I do change that bobbin. In addition, the things that I look for are usually undoing back to a point, and if I can, back to a seam allowance as well. That helps my stitching when I overlap it and start again to be more secure. And I do like to take the opportunity to oil my machine, and you get to see that here. It's just as simple for me as popping out the foot plate and putting in a drop of oil, popping the foot plate back in. And fresh bobbin, and we're back in business. So just underlining once again, I'm using an Isacord 40 weight thread on top in a deep cream, almost a yellow color. And I'm 99% sure I have a Deco bobbin in the bottom, also in an eggshell color, but it would be an 80 weight polyester thread. Love those 80 weight bobbins. They last forever. So here I am overlapping a few of my stitches from earlier, pulling up both thread tails and hanging onto them, doing a few lock stitches really close, and then just launching back into my quilting. So that's how all that goes. And Debbie is thanking us. Ankle replacement is underway. Well, that's really exciting. Piece by Piece Quilts is saying, I missed the first episode. What batting are you using? Single or double layer? Gorgeous quilt. Do go back and catch the first episode because there's a lot of details in there about the loading and so forth. But I will say I am using, oh gosh, did I use Hobbs 82? No, I didn't use Hobbs. Did I use 80-20 though, or bamboo? Do you know what? I'm not 100% sure. So I'll tell you this. I used either 80-20 cotton poly or bamboo. And I think it was bamboo that I used. In either case, it was by Winline. I'm just so much a fan of their batting right now. Okay, here's an area I want to point out. Notice my basting line, right, that's running across from my right to left. And see that I'm getting this little push, a little rill of fabric as I'm approaching it. So I'm using my left hand right now to literally coax the fabric under the needle faster. So you see right here when I go to stitch down, I push the fabric up and it's literally causing a little bit of easing to take place. It's very small. You don't see any puckers, but I do want to respect that basting line. I don't want to shove my fabric, like take the basting out and let my fabric be shoved down or I'll lose my square. So I want to coax that into place as best I can. And it worked quite nicely. This is great practice, by the way, for learning to quilt one-handed, which is, I don't do it all the time. I don't even do it a lot of the time, but boy, is it ever a great skill when you have something like this where you really need that extra hand. And if needed, if you happen to be stitching one of these and doing it in constant speed, just slow it down so that you have that same control and don't feel rushed. But having the left hand to manipulate your fabric a little bit sometimes comes in super, super handy. I talked earlier about how full of admiration I am for Gady, the sewer's artistic eye. Like, look at these fabrics I'm sewing over here. Would you have put those next to each other? Would I have? Probably not. You know, when you're sitting 12 or 18 inches away from the quilt and arranging your hexies, I would not have done that. But when you step back and look at it, it's amazing artistry. And I have a few photos at the end that show both a close-up of the kind of surprising fabric combinations and then moving back, 6 feet or so and looking at it and capturing that overall effect. It's marvelous. It's absolutely marvelous. It made me think of the 90s quilts that were so popular with all florals, and then you would do a portrait of a face just by the value and the hues. And, I never did one because I didn't feel like I had that skill set, but it's the same kind of thing. When you're close up, you don't see it. You just don't see it. But when you back up a little bit, everything comes clear and it all flows together beautifully. So yes, Gady has a very artistic eye for her fabric combinations for sure. I mentioned earlier that the fabric, the fibers of the fabric were different. And certainly this cream colored fabric was a broadcloth, meaning a poly cotton blend. So you can kind of see it in just the way the stitches lay in it is a little bit different than it would be in cotton. However, from my personal experience, my mom was a quilter, in my childhood, which was 70s and 80s largely. And her method was make quilts with what you have. And fabrics, cotton quilting fabrics, were just not that thick on the ground at that point. And certainly where we lived in a remote area of Canada, they were not readily available to us. And so my mom made a lot of quilts with poly cotton broadcloths. And some of them I use to this day. I have 50-year-old quilts that are still functioning. And they're fine. So that did not bother me one whit. It's something that I needed to know. And the cream colored fabrics, because they have that poly blend, they don't, you can't manipulate them the same way that you do cotton. Like cotton, you could, for example, spritz with water and it would like pull up a little bit. With poly, it does not do that. There is no shrinking that will ever happen in it. And so it just behaves a little bit differently. So that knowledge just helps you make decisions about it. Okay, let's see if we have any more questions. We're getting lots of questions about Debbie's husband's new ankle, which is awesome. Betsy Ryan, thank you for the reminder. She's letting me know it was bamboo I put in it, which does not surprise me. I'm just a super fan of Winline's 6-ounce bamboo right now. And I will tell you, it's not as economical as poly cotton, the 80/20 that I more typically use, but it is absolutely luxurious and gorgeous feeling, and it wears super well. I absolutely love it. Here's more of you. Almost sure it was bamboo. I'm sure you're right. And Darlene, thanks you guys. You're the best viewers ever. Look at them all. I love, love, love this. You guys are super. Dorothy is asking, are Winline battings sold in Canada? I don't know the answer for that, Dorothy, but I was actually yesterday thinking about it and thinking, I wonder if they do, and if they don't, I wonder if they could, because I know batting rolls can be really hard to find in Canada. So that would be a great market opportunity for them. Okay. Diane, I have a Q24 and per the dealer have always had top tension at 2.5. Bobbins gauged at 220-ish and everything works great. I recently learned that manual recommends top tension at 4. What do you use? Super question, Diane. I do typically use 4. That is the default tension on a Bernina. If you don't know this, on a Bernina screen, any of your buttons like tension or stitch length or speed of stitching, when they have a yellow box around, a yellow outline around the box, that means there is a default and you're not on it, which is not wrong, but it's just letting you know. But if you click that box, it will pop you right to the default. So this will happen on your tension. If you're working in 2.5, your box will have a yellow ring around it. And if you click on that box, you'll go back to a tension of 4. Now, I think some older machines actually had a different default, might have been 4.25, but anyway, it will run to that default. And I typically do use the 4 with a 220 in the bobbin. So I'm just curious, maybe that has to do with what type of thread you're using. But then, of course, I'll finish up by saying, if it's working for you, I wouldn't change it. If you're getting good results, keep on going. That's really the only major measuring stick that matters. Are you getting good results? Emily is saying, I just wonder if you oil the bobbin case in the process of quilting, the oil doesn't smear onto the quilt. I have not had that happen, Emily. So for one thing, I oil frequently, like every 1 or 2 bobbins, and I oil with 1 drop, and it's a very lightweight oil. Probably similar to what most long arm brands sell. Bernina does have their own, but it's a very not viscous oil, if that makes sense, and it's a very small amount, and I've never had it stain the bottom of a quilt. I never have, so that's good. Nancy is saying, my local store sells Winline overseas fabric in Abbotsford, BC. Interesting. I was not aware that Winline even has fabric. But I'm curious, Nancy, if you perhaps know if they have batting available. Debbie is saying, I use the default for my top tension as well. You know, I'll kind of add to that tension discussion. I do tend to establish my bobbin tension first. and I do aim for the 220-ish, and then I fine tune my top to match. So even if I'm having tension troubles, I will usually first check the bobbin and establish that it's where I want it to be at 220. So for example, if I put a deco bobbin in with an 80 weight thread, I will almost always have to tighten the tension on my bobbin to still get a 220 reading. Does that make sense? It's a finer thread with less resistance, so I end up having to tighten that tension. So I do that first before I start messing with my top tension. So when I make any changes in my bobbin for thread weight, I get that bobbin tension right, and then I adjust my top to suit, if that makes good sense for you. CM makes me want to make a hexie quilt just so I can quilt with the circles. Okay, I'm laughing at you because it does not make me want to make a hexie quilt just so I can quilt with the circles. But I'll tell you what, at onecommonthread.org, you can purchase a hexie quilt. And then you can quilt all the circles you want to. Okay, I need to be watching the video and seeing what we're doing here. As far as I know, we're just quilting and quilting and quilting through the circles. I'm just going to grab my notes here. Bear with me half a second. I had notes of some of the timestamps that interesting things were happening that I thought I might want to point out to you. Nope, nothing's coming up for the next few minutes. You're getting a really good view here of the fairly wildly differing fabrics. It just kept amazing me, you know, seeing this close-up view. I was so amazed at Gady's foresight and eye for color to be able to place these. Choosing the backing for me was a tricky and time-consuming process because I just didn't know what to choose. I looked at this and my first thought was some of these teal type greens. And I actually had pulled, I didn't have enough of any one, and I actually had pulled out two, thinking, well, I could do my trusty zippered backing. And by the way, let me just pause for a second. Did you note that I just came up against that central area that was portioned? And all I did was just go back and forth in rows. And if I needed to, I did stitch over some of these arcs twice to sort of line myself up for the next row. I didn't see any problem with that. Okay, back to our teal fabrics. I had two kind of coordinating ones that I thought I could piece together for that backing. But then I got thinking, you know, I'm using light thread largely. And of course, I ended up using light thread entirely as it turned out. But when I was originally planning, I thought there's going to be a lot of light thread on the bobbin. I don't want to do that on teal green. So eventually my decision was to use a kind of cream colored, deep cream colored shirting. Can you believe it? For the backing. And you'll see that in the photos. And I was really pleased with that result. And then I bound it with a bit of a contrasting fabric, which you'll also see. So here I am again with my left hand easing that fabric under the needle, and you can see the basting line as I'm approaching it. I had laid down these basting lines about every 8 to 10 inches, like lay down a basting line across the width of the quilt, advanced about 10 inches, laid down another basting line. So there were quite a few of them. And I just left them in place until I got close to them, as I am going to be here. Like I won't be able to quilt another row, right, without taking out that basting. And I think I left in an unbasting at some point. Notice that I'm wearing a different shirt. New day, new dollar. Someone did ask early on, you know, how many times I took breaks. Other than the overnight one, I still took them frequently. I could only do about 30 minutes of this before I had to take a good break. You know, really shake up my arms, do some neck rolls, those sorts of things. Just this tiny repetitive motion was quite tiring for sure. Nancy is chiming in my answer to the overseas. Batting Overseas Fabric is the name of the store. Fantastic. And Abbotsford, you know, is in the lower mainland of British Columbia. So that's obviously a resource, which is great. My husband is chiming in, and I'll post it. Farm Girl Quilts sells Winline batting located in BC. That's awesome. And Nancy, and I have to go, darn it. Golly, Dave, you are fast. He is. He's very fast on the uptake. So there's me undoing the basting. Notice right there and right there. I want to make a point about that. If you go back and watch that first episode, I talked about the basting. And when I basted down the side of my quilt, I usually do a 1/4 inch stitching And when I got to where I was going to launch out across the quilt, I did some lock stitches. And then I did inch long stitches across the quilt. And when I got to the other side, I lock stitched again before I stitched up the edge. And the reason for that is so that I can yank them like I'm doing right there in the little bitty picture, right? When I'm undoing those long 1-inch basting stitches and I get to the edge of the quilt, I can yank them and break them without pulling out the basting that I want to leave. So lock stitches are a very useful thing. And we're back to quilting. Do-de-do-de-do. This is the way to do it, you guys. If I could have quilted it this way and just shortened it up, I sure would have. Diane, thanks for the tension discussion. Very helpful. Betsy, it is just beautiful. I completely agree. This quilt is astonishing in its beauty. It really is remarkable. And we're back to changing bobbins and oiling. And in case you missed it earlier, this is one extra step which I didn't do the first time, which is take in a brush and grab the lint. Poly thread is low lint, but there is no thread out there that is no lint. And it is important to get that stuff out of there. Number one cause of tension issues is bits of lint or thread where you don't want them to be. And you can see I just put one tiny drop in. I just was manually moving my wheel and just rolling my bobbin casing back and forth a little. And that's the oiling and cleaning process that I do throughout a quilt. Between quilts, I do more robust cleaning as a rule, but that's what I do from within a quilt. And you can see my red snapper edge clamps. Can you see how I can just slide that right under my hopper foot? That, not everybody can do that, but it's a combination of the slim profile of the E-edge clamps and the height of the hopper foot, because I can raise my hopper foot on my Bernina, works perfectly. So if you're running a Bernina, know that that is a possibility. Look at this, you guys. Magically, we are in the last row of the quilt. Darlene's asking, yes, what did you choose for a backing, which I will show you in just a few moments. Dorothy's saying, thanks, Nancy. Probably shipping to Saskatoon would be prohibitive. Dorothy, I don't know how much batting you use, but I know someone who lives in the Winnipeg area who literally drives across the border and gets several rolls at a time. Just an option. Dave is online again saying there are several Google Winline Batting Canada and several options come up. So there you go. And Tony, this is very thoughtful of you. I hope the maker of the quilt top gets to see pictures or something of the finished quilt. I'm sure she'd love to know it's loved and finished, not shoved in the back of a cupboard somewhere. I think the chances are very high that she will get to see it. I'm in communication with Courtney, who's the... she and her sister Kim are the operators of One Common Thread Quilts. And so she's aware. She watched the first episode and she's fully aware. So I'm sure next time she's in Honduras, she will be showing Gady pictures of this quilt. And by the way, you guys, I haven't mentioned yet that Mr. Producer and I are hosting a cruise in January. And this quilt is definitely going with me to be part of my trunk show. So those of you who are on the cruise will get to see it in person and examine it up close and personal and see how my quilting is. Be the judge. But I do want to mention the cruise. We have, I think, 11 or 12 rooms left of 70. So we're getting close to being sold out. sbsexperiences.com will take you to that. And I'm sure Mr. Producer will pop that one in the link for you. So much good stuff happening on that cruise. So much good stuff. Sam Alberts and Beth Ann Nemish are joining me. So good. Okay, we're at the end. Now you're seeing the big picture and I'm going to unload it. While I do that, Cindy Lou is asking about batting. I just finished a small quilt that's mostly black and I was surprised that little fibers from the batting are coming up through the quilt. Yeah, up is not very common. Down is more common. But did you know, Cindy, that you can purchase black batting? So if I have a quilt that's dark on both top and bottom, I will use black batting just so that I don't have to worry about that. Because even in the needle holes, even if you have great tension, you will sometimes still see those white fibers. But I will say, make sure that you've got a fresh needle and a really good and sharp needle. and really make sure your tension is as good as you can possibly manage it to be if you have to use a white batting on a dark backing. Nancy, fun video. Thanks and have a wonderful day. And I think I answered your question, Cindy. Do I need black batting? It is certainly an option. If your whole quilt is dark, that's the easiest way. Could my black fabric be too thin? Possibly. Nita, for those of you, there we go. For those of you who crochet, there's a YouTube video of a crocheted border on a Hexie quilt. How creative is that? I'll have to look for that too. Judy's asking, why did you choose to baste periodically across the quilt? It's outlined in more detail in the first episode, but because I initially planned to change thread colors for the different floral areas, the pinks, the purples, etc., I wanted to be able to roll my quilt back and forth, quilting all the pinks, at once, and then rolling back and forth and quilting all the greens, etc. As it turned out, I didn't end up doing that, but that was why I had laid the basting in place. Kim is asking, what fabric will you bind with? Well, good news, Kim, is you're going to get to see it in just a few moments. I'm almost finished undoing it here, and then we're going to go into some photographs. Let me make sure that I can run everything when we get to that. I think that's it for the video. Okay, finished quilt, you guys. Look at that. So this is the biggest picture I could get of it, and you get the bonus of extra wires and cords in my sewing room because they're everywhere, because that's where we always film. But here you get the sense of, number one, the beauty of the quilt and the way the floral hexies are arranged as a wreath around the quilt. And also you get to see the center part, which is the white and yellow, I don't even know what to call it, but that focal point in the middle where I quilted the flowers and the little button shapes. I'm just going to mark some of these. Where do I mark my favorite? Hang on a sec. I'm just marking some of these comments so I can come back to them, but I want to progress through the pictures here. Okay, Dave, Control Shift. There we go. Next picture. So this one is straight on. So again, you can see that central area. This is what I quilted in the first episode, the giant kind of rose look in the central white groups of hexies and then the buttony shapes around. I was super pleased with the results of those buttons. I know some of you had questions, and frankly, there were questions in my mind too about what's that going to look like that almost scribbling 4 or 5 times around each one. But doing it multiple times is what kind of pulls in the fabric a little bit, and then you get this raised button effect, which is what I really wanted. So I was happy with that. And there's one more close-up look. You can see the flower now that I did in that cream-colored area. And you can kind of get a sense in this picture for the fact that that cream was, again, the poly cotton broadcloth. And it just does not ease up the way that cotton would. But I think that once the quilt is washed, it's going to be soft and lovely, and you're not really going to notice that at all. So let's look at a couple pictures now of the fabrics that are in it. This one's giving you kind of a bird's eye view of some of the, frankly, wild prints that are combined. It's so amazing. Here's a really close-up look of the little point-to-point arcs. And also, I don't know that I would have put that pink next to the olivey green necessarily, but look at this from a little further out. There's that pink flower. It's just beautiful. It just fits together. I'm continually amazed by the artistry in this quilt. Again, a close-up. Look at the differences of those prints. Look at the differences of greens even. And I would have overthought that. I would have thought, oh, the olive green can't go next to the forest green, which can't go next to the aqua, kind of thing. And here it is from a little further away, that same area. And it's beautiful. One more. Look at this purple fabric. Who thought, oh, that's a gorgeous fabric for a quilt? Not me, but again, here it is. When you step back, that stands out against the other fabrics. And I love it. Love it, love it, love it. Okay, here's a few of the back. A couple of you asked about the backing. This is a cream-colored shirting with kind of a navy, actually, the little stripe. And, initially I looked at the quilt and I thought it's so bold and it's so colorful, and I went toward the more bold choices. I looked for pinks. I looked for purples. I looked, as I said, for teals. But honestly, this understated one seemed to do the best. It just didn't, compete with the colors in the quilt. A few more pictures of the backing. Now you're seeing that button effect again from a little further away. We're going to come back to your comments. I just need both hands to run the pictures. But I promise I'll get back to the comments at the end. And again, straight on from the back of the quilt. It's the best way to see the quilting, quite honestly, as is so often the case. A close-up of one of those roses. I love those. They can be stretched and squeezed to fit all kinds of spaces. And now you see the texture that those hexies created. I love it. I mean, it basically is an all-over texture, even though it kind of quilts out like a custom quilt. Yeah, so happy with that. And there's my binding color, the purple. And one more binding photo. And I'm a bit of a cheater. I do machine bind typically. I seldom want to take the time these days to hand bind, but that's just personal choice. And the way I do it is I stitch on the back of the quilt and I fold around to the front and I top stitch it down using a bobbin thread that matches the backing. Actually, I think I can go back. There you go. You can see the wrong side. The very top one is the wrong side. No, the top one is the right side. The next one is the wrong side. And you can see my bobbin thread line in there. So I stretch my binding around to top stitch so that my top stitching falls not on the binding, but inside on the backing, if that makes sense. So on the middle layer, you can see that. And that's my kind of cheater method of binding, but I'm happy with it. I know how to make neat, crisp corners. I use 2 1/4 inch cut fabric, and that works well for me. Okay, you guys, I'm going to put myself back on the screen. I'm going to answer a few more questions. There I am. Woohoo! Okay, let's go back through these questions. They were coming in thick and fast. Debbie Fleming, wow, that looks great. Judy Johnson, thank you. Wow, beautiful. And Jennifer, gorgeous. I love how it makes each hexie pop up a bit and the central bouquet is so defined. I completely agree, Jennifer. And that was the effect I was hoping for. And sometimes you just don't know until you do it. And I talked about that a bit in the first episode. I had a plan in my head, a vision in my head. However much you draw out on audition sheets or on the Procreate app on your iPad or however you audition designs, you don't fully know what it's going to look like till it takes on the 3 dimensions, if you will, of quilting, that thickness and texture because of the batting. So I was really pleased with the result when it was all said and done. Diane, fantastic. Diana turned out so lovely. Emily, roses in the middle. Hang on a sec. There we go. Roses in the middle, stands out. CM loved the ladybugs. That was one of the cute fabrics, and it was throughout the quilt in a few different places. Nita's asking, will you hand wash the quilt and line dry or washer and dryer? Chances are, Nita, and this is me, chances are I will run it through the washer on a gentle cold cycle. And when I do dry them, I just dry them with very low heat and I do about a half dry and then I lay flat to dry. That's kind of my method for washing quilts. That's kind of my method. I'm all about efficiencies, quite honestly. And I love this one. Looks like Tula Pink could have created this beautiful work and quilting. It does look like Tula Pink could have created it. Diane, even close up, your thread blends with the fabric so well. Great comment. And I'm glad you feel that way because certainly that was a question in my mind. What is my pale yellow thread going to look like across the teals and across the purples? And in fact, it looked just fine. I was not sorry that I did not stop to change thread colors. I don't think that would have significantly added to the beauty of the quilt to have those different thread colors. You probably wouldn't even have noticed. So I'm glad I went with the all over. Debbie, I really like that button effect in the center. Emily, I love this one. Once I did machine binding, I keep doing it. I'm with you, Emily. I've hand bound lots and lots of quilts, or at least hand stitched down the binding. But machine binding is so much faster. And I did enough of them kind of in quick succession, worked out my method, worked out the size of my seam allowances, worked out how to, splice my join at the end so that I can make it really neat and really crisp. And I'm always happier with it, honestly. And it does not ever undo like hand stitching sometimes does, at least in my experience. Sharon looks like a real flower garden. And Dorothy, just beautiful. Thank you. Well, thanks you all for joining me. Do you have any more questions before we go? I'll do another quick recap so that you have a chance to type questions in and they have a minute to come up on my screen. So what I was working on today was a pre-recorded part 2 of a gorgeous Hexie flower garden quilt. Now, this whole Hexie quilt was hand-pieced by a Honduran lady named Gady, and she works with a charitable organization called One Common Thread Quilts. And so I purchased this top from that organization, and it exists to support these Honduran ladies. So I purchased the sewn quilt top, and I did the quilting. So in the first episode, I showed kind of my thought process for what I was planning to do on it. And I will, after we get off air today, I will link that first episode in the description so that you can for sure find it and go back to it. So I talked about my planning. I basted the entire quilt so that it was all stable because my intention was to be able to roll it back and forth. And then I stitched the central flower portions. And then in this second episode, of course, that was pre-recorded because it's 2 weeks since I quilted it. So I shortened it up a little bit and showed you some of the highlights of that finishing up of the quilting process, some of the changes that happened in my plans, and then pictures of the final result. A few of the statistics, I was working on a Bernina Q24. It is entirely free motion quilted. No computer was used in the process of making this quilt. And I was using Isacord 100% poly thread on the top and Wonderfill Deco Bob pre-wound bobbins in an 80 weight on the bottom. And the top had kind of a pale yellow thread and the bottom had an eggshell. Okay, there are a few more comments coming in. Let's grab them. Jennifer's asking, I'm a newbie quilter and have just finished my daughter's king size trip around the world. It's all 5-inch squares, all different shades of blue. What type of quilting do you think? Well, me being me, I'm going to recommend an edge to edge. And honestly, scroll back through my last live and unscripted episodes. I've shown a lot of different ideas, or check out my Pinterest board. I mean, there are other quilters certainly that have them too, but I have a Pinterest board called My Gallery Edge to Edge, and there's lots of ideas there that you can refer to. Oh, and Mary's encouraging you, come on, ladies, like. In other words, thumbs up to this episode. It helps. It absolutely does. Your thumbs up helps other people to have an opportunity to see this episode too. Lynn, we really appreciate you sharing this with us. I'm kind of curious, ladies, like how did this feel watching a pre-recorded one and me doing a running commentary on it? Was that an okay way of consuming this type of content too? Because sometimes Mr. Producer and I can't coordinate, to be actually live, actually quilting on a Friday morning. So this would be an option too, because I can do it a little bit more by myself. Betsy, we need a video on finishing off a machine binding. I actually have a couple videos, Betsy, on my channel for machine binding. Some are more casual and live than others. Some are more lesson-like. So check those out. Look for machine binding on my channel. You'll find them. Sue, thanks for helping me get through the workout. Anything I can do to help. Thanks for not making me work out with you. Karen, is there a right or wrong to machine binding? I just stitched mine on the front and turned to back to sew. There's not. Some people prefer to do it that way. Even with their machines, they prefer to do the second stitching from the back. Some do it all at once with one row of stitching. There's just the method that works for you. There really, really is. I just do encourage you, whatever method you pick, if you do a couple quilts with it in quick succession, you'll kind of work out the bugs and kind of get your system down pat, and it will go much faster thereafter. CM is saying the right way is the way that works for you. I 100% agree with that. Watch what other quilters do and maybe hear their reasons for or against a particular way, and then do what works for you. Karen, beautiful. Glad you were doing it. Super. Kim, can you link to the charitable organization of quilters? Mr. Producer, did you get that in the chat? It is onecommonthread.org is the website, and One Common Thread Quilts is the handle on Instagram and Facebook. Darlene, just wondering why you chose to pin instead of using red snappers. I'm glad you noticed. You must be a faithful viewer. I did mention this in the first episode. It was simply a matter of convenience. I had another custom quilt in progress, so I could either dismount it completely and use my snappers for this show when I began to load the Hexie quilt, or I decided to go with pins just to show that my loading method of not centering, etc., but just rolling it on works, whether you're pinning, whether you're using magnets, whether you're using red snappers. So that's the only reason I pinned. My red snappers were affixed to another quilt, and I chose to not take them off. Emily, what would you say to Glide 60 weight thread as a bobbin thread? It's a great thread. Glide thread is a super quilting thread. You shouldn't have any trouble with that. Thanks so much. Emily forgot to add the QQ, but I saw you, so no worries. Debbie, this was a good way of presenting. Good to know, because I may do more of these then in future, because I could record my quilting whenever I'm doing my quilting, right? And then air it a little later. Mary, that's so sweet. Anyway, you can film. I will enjoy. I appreciate that. Dinah, thanks for sharing. Nita, great show. Good to see the video and have you talking. Darlene, I thought it was just fine watching the pre-recorded. Good. A few of you are saying that. Lynn, Judy, Kim, good. And Kim mentions this, given the repetitive nature of this particular quilting, this voiceover format was ideal. Great point, and you're absolutely right. You know, it did take so long. Nobody would have wanted particularly to sit and watch all of that. And certainly I could not have kept up a running flow of talking through several hours of quilting. So this did shorten it up and you got to see all the highlight points for sure. Tanya, it was okay, but definitely like watching you quilt live better. And I can appreciate that, Tanya. So, you know, that's a format I want to keep, but it's just not always an option. So I appreciate both. And thanks for chiming in. Cindy's Veterans Outreaches is one idea. So would this be a way for acquiring quilts? I'm not sure what you're referring to there. Perhaps I missed an earlier comment. Sharon, pre-recorded works for me as long as you include the issues and the bloopers. Yeah, I'll try to, Sharon. But I think there will always be live videos because that's my happy place. That's my favorite way to bring you guys quilting content. Good. I think that'll do about it. There are a few more of you, Cindy, chiming in, but similar comments. So I appreciate all of that. Well, you guys, it's been fun. We'll do this again sometime. Those of you who are going on to the summit, you still have time to get into that live Q&A. And those of you who are working on your quilts in your own studio today, enjoy it thoroughly. And I'm off to load another quilt as well. So have a great rest of the day, and I will catch up with you next time.